Thanks everyone for inviting me. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. First time I've ever been to this college, which looks fantastic. So I'm going to talk about this paper, the Gender Wellbeing Gap. I have an ESRC grant on the gender wage gap, and of course we always think about the gender wage gap, but I don't know if I'd heard the phrase. Probably it existed before we thought of it, but the gender wellbeing gap. And the reason for that is the essence of this talk. It wasn't clear in the literature that always and everywhere there is a gender wellbeing gap. But I'm going to argue that there is, apart from with respect to just 3 outlier variables in the wellbeing literature. And I'm going to try and convince you of that with some extremely simple analysis, but across a large number of data sets across time and space. So it's important, subjective wellbeing. We know that it's now an area of interest in policy, not just in Europe. I've just come back, as has Alberto, from Japan, and guess what I discovered? The Cabinet Office in Japan is extremely interested in the issue of well-being, especially worker well-being, as we speak. And we know people like Richard Layard have talked about it being maximising perhaps well-being could be an important policy objective. We also know that Danny Kahneman talks about minimising ill-being being an important policy objective. So we might be concerned if we discover persistent, sizable gaps in well-being as between groups in the population. And before this paper, we already knew a fair amount about this. In our previous work, we've drawn attention to women having many more bad mental health days in the BRFSS data in the United States, lower momentary well-being, lower domain satisfaction as opposed to life satisfaction, satisfaction with subsets of your life. And I'm going to be talking about that a bit more today. Also lower self-reported health and women taking more antidepressants. However, a lot of the wellbeing literature is devoted to a subset of wellbeing metrics, life satisfaction, happiness, and as I'll show you, Cantrell's ladder, where this gap doesn't really exist. It's created a lot of, arguably, confusion in the literature. There are some papers recently that argue perhaps there's actually a paradox at the heart of this wellbeing literature, that women can both be maxing out in ill-being relative to men, but also at the same time in well-being. Others argue, no, this is all a big confusion because actually it depends a lot on the control variables that you use in your models. So if you have a wider set of controls, you get very different results than if you just look at simple raw differences. Others, going further back, Ed Diener saying, well, maybe this is something about a difference between men and women in terms of either their preparedness to express well-being and ill-being, or possibly social norms around their preparedness to do so. So there's a lot going on in the literature. Others say, again, Ed Diener, there's no paradox here. These wellbeing metrics are fundamentally different in ways which might explain the way in which, the patterns in which men and women express themselves with respect to these wellbeing metrics. So that was the literature as we started. So I'm going to do a very standard thing that Danny Blanchflower and I like to do in many of our papers. Go grab as many data sets as we can with as many well-being metrics as we can and ill-being metrics, and just start to work with the data to see what we find. So in this case, we have 56 well-being metrics, 34 positive affect, 22 negative, 8 cross-country surveys, many countries in many of them, 2 US surveys, 1 Canadian survey, And we're going to see whether there is a gap as between the mean differences between men and women in how they express themselves in terms of these well-being metrics. And we're going to start with, we normally will show very raw differences, raw means, and then we'll have regression adjusted means, which just adjust for some very simple exogenous variables, things like age and age squared, perhaps location. And then we'll test the robustness of our results to the introduction of variables that might be plausibly more endogenous to see whether that shifts the differences around in any way. And what we're going to show you is that women score more highly than men on all negative affect metrics I'm going to show you, and lower than men on all positive affect metrics except for 3. And those 3 are going to be happiness, life satisfaction, and Cantrell's ladder. And I'm going to show you that those flip around a bit. There's no robust result as between gender differences of men and women on those 3 metrics. But as I say, for most of these results, there is this substantial gap. It's apparent across country, across time. It's robust to the metrics that you use to control for, some of them endogenous, but there are these 3 exceptions. Now, what I'm not going to tell you is why. I'm going to speculate a little bit about that. We've got some speculation in the papers that we have produced as discussion papers and are under review at the moment, but it's pure speculation at the moment. So I'm going to go straight to the results. I'm going to start with Gallup. And there are going to be 2 flavours of Gallup data here, the World Poll and the US Daily Tracker. And starting with these 3, how much you were feeling about things yesterday, happiness, enjoyment and worry, and you'll see some interesting results straight away. So here, actually I've gone a bit further than that. You've got Cantrell's ladder, happiness, future life is how you expect your life satisfaction to be in the future, enjoyment, feeling rested and so on. And these numbers I'm showing you are just the female coefficients. They have a positive and a negative sign next to them, and there will be a T statistic in parentheses. So anybody who's not familiar with these things, anything 2 and above, it's going to be statistically significant. And what you can see across the different rows is different model specifications. So in the top row, no controls at all, just a raw difference. Then bring in state and year fixed effects, then bring in age and education, and finally bring in labour force status. What do we find? Well, if we look at Cantrell, you'll see in these Gallup US Daily Tracker data, women always higher on this metric of well-being than men. Doesn't matter what you control for. That's true on happiness. It's true on life satisfaction in the future. Okay, so, big robust results there. Women on the upside on well-being, but look at everything else. Enjoyment, women negative, rested negative, sad positive, stressed positive, pain positive, worry positive, depressed positive. Yeah? How can this be, you might think? What I'm going to show you is these first 3 columns, pretty unusual in terms of the wellbeing literature. Yeah? Here's an example of what a more extended version of some of those models might be. So again, the thing in bold there is the female coefficient on enjoyment, happiness and worry. How can it be that women are both happier and more worried and expressing less enjoyment? Let's turn to the Gallup World Poll. Yeah? So this has, I think, 160 something countries in it. And you find the same results. Women expressing higher well-being on Cantrell, happiness, future life satisfaction, but negative on enjoyment and rested, and showing much greater negative affect across these metrics: sadness, stress, pain, worry, depression. And again, if you look at the rest of the model, standardly we always include location fixed effects. It's curious, isn't it, that women are both happier but also express less enjoyment and express more worry than men. Okay, so that's Gallup, 2 flavours of Gallup, US and world. Let's go elsewhere. Oh, no, before I do that, let's look at the time series. So year on year, Cantril and enjoyment, there ain't nothing happening across time, yeah? On Cantril, women always ahead of men every year. Here we're just conditioning on country and or state controls for the US. And on enjoyment, always negative and statistically significant. Yeah? General social survey, what's nice about that, of course, it goes back some way, but we don't necessarily, we only have a 3-step happiness metric there, but we do have some domain satisfaction. And as you'll find throughout every data set we look at, on domain-specific satisfaction, whether it's with family life or a bunch of other things, women are always in the negative zone. When it comes to happiness, in the GSS at least, you get a small positive in favour of women. It's worth thinking about the general social survey because, as we say in the paper, but I'm not going to spend any time on it here, that occasioned a great deal of interest when people like Justin Wolford started to talk about what was happening to the gender wellbeing gap over time. This then is the European Social Survey. So we're in Europe now. We've got we've got sweeps 1 to 10, and we've got 3 different outcomes: depression, life satisfaction, and happiness. And you'll see that we've got 3 flavours of model. First, no controls whatsoever. That's model 1. What do we find here? Women expressing much greater depression than men. And this particular data set, less satisfied with life than men. But look what happens when you introduce controls here on life satisfaction. It flips around, yeah? We go from a negative to a statistically non-significant positive. And there in the final model, when we condition on age as well as time and countries, this actually turns statistically significant. So we see some flipping around on life satisfaction, and exactly the same thing happens on happiness, yeah? The raw difference is negative, women lower on this occasion. Remember, that's different from Gallup. But when you introduce some controls, it flips around. So actually, that's very much sort of thing that one of the papers I was talking about says, look, it's all about the nature of the controls. But actually, when it comes to depression, absolutely not, yeah? The coefficients don't move very much, women expressing much greater depression than men. If we look at separate country estimates, we look country by country, we find that in every country in the European Social Survey, women are more depressed, more likely to feel sad. That's true in every single separate country regression. What about enjoying life? 22 countries, women lower than men. 7, no significant difference. And Estonia, the only country where women are expressing greater enjoyment than men. On life satisfaction, you see 10 positives in favour of women, 6 negatives, and the rest are non-significant. And happiness, again, you see things shifting around. Yeah. So again, we see on life satisfaction and happiness, we see different results across space and across the different model specifications. But when it comes to things like negative affect, like depression, we see this constant gender wellbeing gap. Let's look at a wider set of metrics. So the first set at the top, panel A, these are all negative affect metrics, and the first column has no controls whatsoever. women always higher on negative affect than men. Does it matter when you introduce some controls? No, it does not. What about positive affect? Women always lower than men, both in the raw data and with some basic controls. Yeah? What about domain-specific satisfaction? Again, women always lower than men, both raw and with controls. But what happens with these global positive affect metrics? In this case, now this time, women are lower than men, statistically significantly so, although that goes down quite a lot with some controls. It flips positive, yeah? So again, we see it flipping around, and that happens on happiness too. So very constant results, both in raw and with basic controls, on all other aspects of negative affect and positive affect. When it comes to life satisfaction, happiness, and Cantril, you get something different. This then is just looking over time at domain-specific satisfaction, and you can see the results are constant across time, by and large. Not always. Life satisfaction is fundamentally different. That's not domain-specific, that's a global metric, life satisfaction. That does flip around. So again, life satisfaction flipping around, the gap's not obvious, but on domain-specific satisfaction, absolutely. This is Eurobarometer data, and I can't see the top, but I'm guessing, what is the top here? Can we get rid of that? No, what is it then?
You can just move it.
Drag it aside. If you grab it and drag it aside.
Life satisfaction, that's raw, and that's with some controls. This is Eurobarometer data. And again, we see things flipping around, yeah? Across time. These gaps, as between men and women, are not constant when it comes to life satisfaction. Oh, is that not working?
I'll click back and try again.
Now, this is Eurobarometer, and this time this is about expectations going forward. Here are the questions. What are your expectations for the next 12 months? Will the next 12 months be better, the same, or worse with respect to the economic situation in the country, the employment situation in the country, your life satisfaction, your financial situation, your personal job? And here we see women posting negatives on thinking about the global situation with respect to the economy, the employment situation, but we see positive for their own individual life satisfaction, domain-specific stuff on expectations, the financial situation and personal situation, negative. So we find women have lower domain-specific satisfaction despite having lower expectations and having higher evaluations of life in general, notwithstanding higher expectations. This then is the European Quality of Life Survey, and you're going to start to see the pattern time and again and again. Negative affect, these are all positives. Women expressing greater negative affect, whether it's downhearted and depressed, tense, seldomly enjoying things, feeling lonely, feeling left out, feeling life's too complicated. Doesn't matter what you control on. Here we've got raw, exogenous controls, then a full set of controls, including things that might be endogenous. Same on positive affect. It's women are lower than men. It doesn't matter what variables you're using, yeah? Fresh and rested, cheerful, daily life interests me. I feel active and vigorous. I'm free to decide things. Women always lower than men. Same on domain-specific satisfaction, education, living standards, family life. Women lower than men. What about these global life satisfaction and happiness variables? Well, you see some raw difference here in these data, European Quality of Life Survey. Women lower than men, but you add in a few controls and the gap's gone. No longer a statistically significant difference. So once again, this is exactly what we see in all the other data sets. When it comes to life satisfaction and happiness, It's all over the place. European Values Survey, same. Yeah? Life satisfaction and happiness at the top, no significant difference. But look at these other, we've even got trust in here now. Women less trusting than men. There must be a social capital literature on that I don't know about. There we are. Satisfaction, domain satisfaction, women negative. Women less likely to be excited, less pleased, less feeling that things are going their way. More restless, more lonely, more bored, more depressed and unhappy, more upset when they're criticised. When it comes to life satisfaction and happiness, the coefficients are flipping around with time, yeah? So you've got stuff going on. International Social Survey. Again, women on negative affect, always positive and strong. Life satisfaction, here, negative. And on the margins of significance with a few controls. This is the PISA data, and this is quite interesting because this is about 15-year-olds, yeah? So most of the surveys I've shown you so far, you're not going to get children in them. But here we are, these are children. And these children, as women, are more sad, more miserable, more scared, more afraid, and more distressed. And they're 15. Life satisfaction here, big negative actually for women. So what have we found? Positive sign on female coefficients for 22 negative affect variables. And there they are, pretty constant across time and place. A negative sign for female coefficients in every one of a further 31 positive affect variables. 21 relating to the individual, 6 relating to satisfaction on national issues like democracy, 4 relating to expectations in the year ahead. They tend to be largely insensitive to response coding, the period over which the respondent is asked to assess their well-being. I haven't mentioned much about that. They're robust to the controls that we put in, exogenous in some cases, endogenous variables. But when it comes to life satisfaction and happiness, things are all over the place. These are each of the data sets, European Social Survey, Eurobarometer. We've got others in the paper I haven't even mentioned, Latino Barometer, European Values Survey, European Quality of Life Survey, International Social Survey Programme, PISA, GSA, you name, the Canadian one. You see the correlation between gender and these well-being metrics, these global well-being metrics, they can be positive, they can be negative, they can be statistically non-significant. So fundamentally different from the other well-being metrics. So you have to ask, well, what's going on? I mean, Deaton and Kahneman talk about happiness, life satisfaction, and Cantrell being cognitive evaluations and perhaps fundamentally different from capturing affect as an emotive state. So determinants may well be different, including on gender. Remember, women are more negative on subjective well-being on issues not just about them personally, but their evaluation of the world, politics, economics, the education system. So it's not just about feelings about yourself. One untested hypothesis we have, and I've got the web link in the end, which is the one that Freakonomics picked up on because they absolutely love it. This is a man's world constructed by men for men, so maybe these metrics are reflecting the daily experiences of men versus women. But then why not with respect to life evaluation? Do their set points differ? Do women respond differently to the normative component that lies behind some of these questions relative to men? Dina has a thought on that. We haven't tested any of this. We've just mapped what we think of as an empirical regularity. I mean, so in the literature on well-being, people talk about the paradox men versus women. We don't think there's a paradox there. We think there's some oddities with respect to 3 metrics, but nothing else. But remember, it's men suffering deaths of despair and overdoses, cirrhosis of the liver, suicide. Yeah. There are more male suicides than there are female ones. So we think, oh, why are men expressing, why are they, quotes, happier in all these other dimensions? Of course, Danny reminds me that actually women are more likely to attempt to take their lives than men. So, I mean, we just add that in at the end of the paper. We haven't really got anything to say about that, but obviously there's going to be important ongoing work. Certainly my colleagues at UCL said, look, for more than 20 years, we've had little empirical evidence delineating the drivers of this gender wellbeing gap. They're pointing to issues that are now getting coverage, even in economics. We talked about your colleagues across the way in the Department of Economics, Abby's doing work on sexual violence and progress in the labour market. There might be issues around gender norms across countries, I'm not so sure. One thing I'm working on is early life events and exposures and subsequent subjective well-being of men and women. Why am I doing that? Because we have the birth cohort data at UCL. Well, actually, you all have it. It's in the archive. It's just I happen to be working with people who know it inside out. So we've been starting to look at adverse childhood experiences collected prospectively and looking at well-being over the life course, yeah. So I've got a paper on bullying, for example, I'm looking at that. Could it be that there are different exposures to these things across men and women, or conditional on exposure? Are there different responses of men and women? Of course, a big thing to go away with that literature is not everybody goes away feeling messed up. There's something called resilience that Richard Loward and colleagues used to go on about, I'm sure people do now. And there's also the biometrics of this stuff as well. You can start to get into with genetic data, although that might be a minefield. And so this first paper, the Gender Wellbeing Gap, is under review at the moment, but that's the working paper. That's a VoxEU rendition of it, but forget all that. Just go listen to these guys, because it's really interesting and entertaining what they do with what we said and how they take it on. It's really worth doing. But there are other things we've done. I want to draw your attention to this one, because not a lot of people know this. There are seasonal patterns in well-being of men and women within the year. Okay? And if you don't know when your survey is taken within the year and you make inferences about a cross-year variance, you're done for. So that's what that paper's about, and it's very pertinent to things like the Gallup data. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.